It began with a smile, not the warm kind that welcomes you in, but the kind practiced over years, engineered to look neutral while pushing you out. "Excuse me," the officer said, gesturing toward the lane. "This line's for government clearance only." His voice was calm. So was Maya Thompson's. She had been standing in that line for 10 minutes, quiet, still unbothering. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't skipped. She simply existed in a space her presence was clearly disrupting. She looked behind her. No one else had been questioned. No one else had been told to move. No one else was black. With practiced composure, she replied, "I'm with the federal government. Priority status cleared for expedited processing." But her words weren't met with verification or even the benefit of the doubt. Instead, the officer's eyebrow lifted, not to check, but to challenge. "That right?" he said, his tone sinking like a quiet accusation. "You're with the government?" Maya answered, unfazed. "Yes." The chuckle he gave was low, dismissive, half laugh, half warning. A lot of folks say that when they want to skip ahead. She didn't flinch. "I'm not skipping. I'm following federal protocol." He still didn't ask for her ID. He didn't call for confirmation. He simply scanned her. Her coat, her natural hair pulled back into a bun, the skin she had worn all her life. And then with a final snap, he said, "Lady, you can't just say you're with the government. This line's for official business, not whoever shows up with confidence." The terminal was still. Maya stood firm. "I can present credentials," she offered. His voice tightened. "That won't be necessary. You people always have some story about who you are." And there it was, not shouted, not vulgar, but heavy. "You people." Those two words landed like centuries, not loud, but loud enough for everyone in line to hear the real message. You don't belong here. You don't look the part. You don't pass. Someone behind her exhaled sharply. A man muttered, "Just follow instructions." Another voice whispered, "What's she trying to prove?" Still, the officer hadn't asked for any ID. Still, he had not radioed anyone. Still, he had not said a word to the white man who had passed through the same line minutes earlier, wearing flip-flops and a hoodie. Maya didn't move. She wasn't calm because it didn't affect her. She was calm because she was calculating. The officer stepped in closer now, his voice practically daring her. "Unless you've got some magic badge in that bag, I suggest you move." Maya reached slowly, deliberately. She pulled open her coat, reached into her pocket, and withdrew a black leather wallet. She opened it. The badge caught the light. It gleamed. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Clearance level, high. Status, active duty agent. The officer didn't speak. Maya didn't need him to. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just stood there holding her ID, watching as the color drained from his face. "I'm Agent Maya Thompson," she said, voice low but razor sharp. "And you've just profiled a federal officer on duty." The terminal didn't erupt. It froze. Not in fear, but in recognition. Somewhere in that line, a teenager already had their phone recording. The clip would go viral before the plane even touched down. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that one woman had silently rewritten the power dynamic in the space between accusation and truth. Not through rage, not through noise, but through the precision of presence and the weight of her badge. And this was only the beginning. The airport was alive with its usual orchestrated chaos, the murmur of conversations, the rhythmic roll of suitcases, the echo of boarding calls bouncing off high ceilings. Security announcements crackled through the speakers in multiple languages, their repetition blending into background noise. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter briefly broke through, quickly replaced by the buzz of a distant coffee grinder. Shoes scraped across tile. A phone rang and was silenced. But in that government clearance line, a different kind of tension hung in the air. Dense, still, invisible, yet undeniable. Maya felt it press down on her, even as she stood motionless, eyes forward, posture perfect. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her jaw didn't clench. She had been here before. Not this exact airport, not this exact line, but this moment. The moment when you are seen not as you are, but as what someone fears you might be. The officer's voice, earlier practiced and neutral, began to shift. Each syllable grew heavier, more deliberate. "You people always have some story about who you are." He didn't raise his voice, didn't lean in aggressively, but the message landed with surgical precision. It wasn't just about Maya. It was about every assumption he held that collided with her presence in that line. The phrase, "you people," floated in the air like a whisper laced with history, a quiet declaration that spoke louder than any shout. Nearby passengers shifted. Some glanced away. One woman looked down at her shoes, pretending not to hear. Another man scoffed, his voice low but audible. Just follow instructions. Someone else whispered, what's she trying to prove? But Maya didn't flinch. On the outside, she was the picture of calm. Inside, her thoughts moved with the quiet ferocity of a storm. This wasn't new. It never was. D.C. last summer, same protocol, different badge. Atlanta the year before, different airport, same eyes questioning her belonging. She remembered the TSA agent who asked 3 times if her ID was real. She remembered the officer in Chicago who told her with a smile that she looked too young to be with the Bureau. Each time she swallowed the frustration. Each time she stayed composed, because she had to. Because every reaction would be used against her. And because silence in these spaces wasn't just survival, it was strategy. As the officer stepped closer, she smelled his cologne, strong, synthetic, the kind that lingered. His stance tightened. Unless you've got some magic badge in that bag, he muttered, I suggest you move. 3 minutes earlier, a white man in flip-flops and a hoodie had walked right through. No questions, no glances, not even a nod. He had shuffled past with his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, sipping from a fast food cup. No one stopped him. No one doubted him. Maya had watched that happen, and she knew without needing proof that the rules weren't just written in policy, they were written in perception. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she moved slowly, deliberately. Her coat opened like a curtain revealing truth. From a hidden pocket, she pulled a small black leather wallet. Her hands didn't shake. Her gaze didn't break. She flicked the wallet open with a practiced motion. And there it was. The badge glinted beneath the sterile overhead lights, silver, official, undeniable. The lettering engraved on the seal caught the reflection of fluorescent tubes. Federal Bureau of Investigation, high-level clearance, active duty agent. She didn't speak right away. She gave the badge time to speak first. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was judicial. It weighed more than any argument ever could. The officer didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. And when Maya finally did speak, her voice was low, firm, and cutting. I'm Agent Maya Thompson, she said, and you've just profiled a federal officer on duty. 50 pairs of eyes watched the scene, locked in stillness. Somewhere down the line, the teenager with the phone hadn't stopped recording. From the moment she was questioned, their camera had been up, nervous at first, then steady. Maya didn't know their name. She didn't need to. That teenager would soon be responsible for a national conversation. But right then, Maya didn't look for the lens. She didn't perform. She simply tucked the badge away and walked forward, past the man who tried to dismiss her, past the murmurs of doubt, past the unspoken expectation that she should have bowed out quietly. She picked up her shoes, collected her laptop, reached for her boarding pass. The ache in her chest hadn't left. In fact, it had settled more deeply. It wasn't the insult that stung. It was the familiarity. This wasn't the first time she had been reduced to a question mark. It wouldn't be the last. Her credentials had been hard-earned, but her skin spoke louder. Her presence alone was a disruption that demanded proof. Her badge wasn't armor, it was defense. A constant tool she carried not out of pride, but necessity, because the world wouldn't let her belong without it. By the time she reached the gate, the video had already begun to spread. The teenager uploaded it before the plane doors even closed. The caption read, "Imagine if she didn't have ID." The clip was short, 2 minutes and change, but it was enough. Enough to make people look. Enough to make them uncomfortable. Enough to make it go viral. Shares passed 100, then 1,000, then 1,000,000. The video didn't need her name. It didn't need a hashtag. It needed only that moment. The confrontation, the badge, the silence. Maya sat on the plane, headphones in, head down. She didn't check her phone again, though it buzzed incessantly. Friends, colleagues, former classmates, some outraged, some offering quiet apologies. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She had a job to do, and this wasn't part of the plan. When the plane landed, a message from the Bureau was waiting in her inbox. No congratulations, no commendation, just protocol. Please report to compliance for internal assessment regarding public exposure of recent incident. And just like that, the attention turned inward. Because in the world Maya worked in, it didn't matter that she had been publicly humiliated. What mattered was that the Bureau had been seen. And this was just the beginning. Maya boarded the plane without a word. The weight of what had just happened clung to her like humidity, thick and silent. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, shoes off, laptop out, badge tucked back in her coat as if it had never seen daylight. She took her window seat, pulled on her headphones, and stared ahead as the rest of the passengers settled in. But the hum in her chest didn't fade. Her phone buzzed nonstop in the pocket of her blazer. She didn't check it. Not yet. She knew what it was, already. The moment the badge flashed, the teenager's phone had been raised. The video was in motion, and now so was the world. But Maya remained still, suspended somewhere between fury and focus. The plane lifted. Her mind stayed grounded in the echo of that officer's tone, "You people," as if it were still vibrating across her skin. Down below, the digital wildfire had begun. Screens lit up, tweets posted, captions typed in rapid succession. Imagine if she didn't have ID. This is why we record. This is why we don't stay silent. Hashtags emerged, activists retweeted, commentators speculated. The internet screamed. But Maya didn't. She didn't join the storm. She didn't like, post, or respond. For the public, it was a moment of outrage. For her, it was just another Tuesday. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was processing, calculating. 100 versions of this scenario lived in her memory. None of them recorded, none of them believed. When the plane touched down, her phone had over 70 unread messages. She opened only one, the one from her agency. The header was clinical. Compliance notification, immediate response requested. No greeting, no human warmth, just instructions. She was to report to Internal Affairs for a review concerning public exposure and operational conduct. No mention of what had been done to her. No inquiry into the officer's behavior. Just concern about optics. About how they now looked because of her. It wasn't a reprimand, not yet. But it wasn't support either. It was protocol. Cold, detached, wrapped in the language of accountability, but empty of solidarity. 2 days later, she sat across from 2 Internal Affairs officers in a gray, windowless room. They offered her bottled water she didn't touch. Both men were white. Both wore stiff suits that matched the script they read from. Their voices were soft, controlled, polished like table edges. They asked if she was comfortable. Then they asked why she hadn't de-escalated, why she hadn't redirected the situation more quietly, why she didn't simply step aside. The questions weren't cruel. They were clinical, designed not to understand, but to assess liability. They didn't ask how she felt. They didn't ask what she experienced. They asked what she did and why she didn't do less. Maya answered every question with measured care, knowing every word could be revisited. She didn't speak emotionally. She didn't raise her voice. She was calm and tired. After 40 minutes of questioning, she signed the transcript. She didn't argue with it. She just stood, nodded, and left. She walked back to her desk like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just relived the moment, but under cross-examination, like her dignity had been a risk factor in someone else's equation. The next morning, an unmarked envelope appeared on her desk. No sender, no note, just a single page inside, a handwritten letter. It read, "He did the same thing to my son, said he looked too nervous to fly, took him to a screening room and humiliated him. He was just 17. He didn't have a badge to show. Thank you." The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They held weight like a stone, quiet, immovable. Maya stared at the letter for several long minutes. The ache in her chest sharpened, not with anger, with confirmation. This wasn't about her. It never had been. It was a pattern, and no one had stopped it until someone filmed it. She didn't make a complaint. She made a request, not for punishment, but for clarity. She filed an official request to review all civilian complaints filed against Officer Craig Benson over the last 5 years. It wasn't about proving racism. It was about proving the system never bothered to ask the question. That silence wasn't absence of evidence. It was evidence of avoidance. Maya didn't go public. She didn't make a statement. She didn't retweet. She watched. Watched the numbers rise. Watched the shares explode. Watched commentators use the word composure like it was a compliment, as if enduring discrimination without breaking was a skill to be admired. She wasn't flattered. She was focused. Within 72 hours, the video passed 5 million views. A petition began circulating, demanding Benson's termination for racial profiling. Activists unearthed other travelers' stories. But Maya was ahead. She already had the files. She had already requested the internal reviews. And what she found didn't surprise her. But it did solidify her purpose. Complaint after complaint. Most filed by black or brown travelers. Most ended the same. Insufficient evidence. No misconduct found. No follow-up necessary. Language that wasn't designed to investigate, but to neutralize. She also found a staff memo dated 6 months prior, praising Benson's strict style as an asset. That was the phrase. Strict style, the code that allowed people to hover just inside policy while walking all over dignity. The media arc was predictable. First came fury, then curiosity, then fatigue. Outrage turned into think pieces. Think pieces turned into silence. But Maya didn't fade with the headlines. She wasn't looking for visibility. She was building a case. And she knew that the only thing more powerful than the spotlight was a spotlight she didn't need, because now something had changed, not just the attention, but the momentum. A review had begun, quiet, internal, focused, and at the center of it stood the name, Craig Benson. But Maya wasn't interested in just one name. She wanted the system to explain itself, not to her, to itself. And that's when the real shift began. The paper trail was dense. Not in size, but in avoidance. Maya sat alone in a records room, file folders open around her like a battlefield. Complaint after complaint, names she'd never heard, faces she'd never seen, each telling a nearly identical story. Harassment, profiling, delayed screenings, personal invasions masked as routine checks. The language was always the same: reasonable discretion, officer judgment, no further action required. Each phrase a small wall designed to stop momentum, not build understanding. Her eyes stopped on one memo in particular, Benson's name highlighted beside the term strict style. She exhaled slowly. There it was again. Code, euphemism, bureaucracy's favorite shield. They didn't protect individuals, they protected patterns by disguising them as professionalism. Maya compiled everything: internal assessments, redacted memos, the same complaint phrases copy-pasted across years. She built a dossier that didn't accuse, it revealed. Quietly, she reached out to a trusted former instructor, now a deputy director in internal security review. They met off-site over black coffee in a nondescript corner cafe where no one took selfies or lingered too long. Maya slid the folder across the table. He opened it, brows furrowed. Slowly, he scanned the content. No reaction. Not yet. Just turning pages, absorbing context. Finally, he looked up. "Do you want to open a case?" The question wasn't gentle. It was surgical. "No," Maya said calmly. "I want oversight. I want someone outside the airport authority to look at the whole thing. Not him, it." He nodded slowly, tapping the folder. "You know what this means. Visibility, not just for him, for you too." Maya didn't flinch. "Visibility's never protected me," she said, "but transparency might protect someone else." By the end of the week, the agency began responding, not with support, but concern. HR called first, a polite voice reminding her to consider organizational implications before pushing too hard too fast. Then came the anonymous call, a woman's voice, low and tired. "I worked with Benson 3 years ago. I filed a report when I saw how he treated black women. They didn't discipline him. They transferred me instead. No name, no callback number, just truth dropped like a pin into silence." The more Maya moved forward, the more the system revealed itself. Craig Benson wasn't a fluke. He was a fixture. The protections surrounding him weren't mistakes. They were methods. Then the breakthrough came. Not loud, not public, but unmistakable. In a closed-door federal oversight briefing, Maya's file landed on the table. No headlines, no public leak. Just the sound of chairs adjusting, pages turning, and a room full of government officials realizing this wasn't just one bad officer. It was a structural exposure. Days later, the Department of Homeland Security made a quiet announcement. A sudden internal audit into bias-related complaints in airport security had been initiated. No names mentioned, no direct acknowledgement. But everyone who'd been watching knew exactly what had triggered it. The tremor was instant, not on the news, but in the halls of power. Quiet phone calls, rushed strategy meetings, an unusual number of temporary reassignments across airport security departments in 3 major cities. Maya noticed. She read between the memos. This wasn't justice, but it was movement. The system was shifting, not because it wanted to, but because it had been forced to, and the public didn't even know. There were no press conferences, no apologies, but inside the machine, ripples were becoming waves. More messages came. Former TSA agents, victims who never got cameras pointed at them. One woman pulled aside because her afro was considered suspicious, a father whose 10-year-old son was strip searched for matching a profile. None of it had gone viral, but all of it had happened. Maya cataloged each one, not to punish, but to understand the scale. Her strength wasn't rage, it was documentation. Quiet, methodical, relentless, and with every entry, her case grew. Not against Benson, but against the culture that protected him. She began drafting language, line by line, not for press releases, but for policy. In a small, beige meeting room tucked inside the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Maya took her seat at the table, uninvited but undeniable. She asked for records access. She didn't want to speak on panels. She wanted to rewrite the very words that allowed behavior like Benson's to go unchecked. She proposed a clause requiring pattern-based reviews, even when individual cases were dismissed. She pushed for tracking racial demographics in security stops, something that had never been formally collected. She advocated for training that wasn't about sensitivity, but about accountability. Training with consequences. She didn't seek credit. She sought structure, something that could live beyond her badge, beyond the story. And slowly, things moved. The DHS released a memo announcing the launch of a bias review protocol pilot program in 3 major airports. It didn't mention her name. It didn't need to. One of her policy clauses made it into the draft, and that was enough. She wasn't writing for recognition. She was writing for the girl in the letter, for the boy pulled out of line, for every person who didn't have a badge to flash or a phone to record. The bureaucratic language hid the revolution, but Maya could see it. Some officers pushed back, accusing leadership of policing the police. Others, surprisingly, welcomed the shift, grateful for clarity in a profession too often defined by ambiguity. For the first time, there was a framework, a standard, a rule book for power, and not the kind used to control the powerless, but to hold power accountable. Benson never returned. There was no announcement, no formal reprimand, just a quiet early retirement and a vague internal note about realignment of supervisory leadership. But the airport began recruiting new security supervisors, this time with inclusive enforcement standards as a job requirement. That wasn't performative. That was structural. Maya never celebrated. She didn't make a speech, didn't flip her badge on a desk and declare victory. That's not what accountability looks like. It looks like absence. The absence of the next Benson, the absence of humiliation at a checkpoint, the absence of being seen as a threat before being seen as a person. She stayed in her role. She wrote the next memo, took the next meeting, drafted the next clause. She wasn't the face of change. She was its architect. And she wasn't finished. Coming next, Maya joins a specialized task force, buried deep within the federal infrastructure to confront hidden patterns across the entire national transit network. A network where silence isn't just complicity, it's policy. Stay tuned. Maya Thompson began this story standing in silence, asked to step aside not because of what she did, but because of what she represented. A black woman in a government line, calm, patient, legitimate, yet made invisible by someone who believed authority looked different than her. But that moment didn't end with a confrontation. It became a catalyst. Maya, once profiled as a stranger, would go on to become a systems architect. From responding to one officer's bias, she built a network of policy change. From one badge reveal, she launched an audit that shook multiple cities. She went from being a subject of scrutiny to the author of accountability. And she did it without cameras, without microphones, just pages, protocols, and quiet resolve. There were no headlines at the end of this journey. No one handed her a medal. No breaking news celebrated her as a trailblazer. But that was never the point. The true victory was quieter, quieter than applause, quieter than outrage. In the beginning, Maya walked through an airport unsure whether her dignity would be recognized. In the end, she built a system that no longer required her to prove it. What changed wasn't the volume of her voice, it was the weight of her impact. She didn't fight for visibility. She redefined visibility itself. Peace, for Maya, didn't come in the form of revenge or vindication. It came in moments others might overlook, passing through security without delay, watching officers follow new protocols she quietly authored, hearing from a colleague that complaints are no longer filed into silence. Peace was absence. The absence of humiliation, the absence of hesitation, the absence of having to explain why she belonged. And for someone who had spent years bracing for disbelief, that absence was everything. To those of you watching this now, have you ever been stopped for how you look, not what you've done? Have you been treated like an outlier in a space you worked twice as hard to earn your place in? Have you felt the pressure to stay composed just to survive being misunderstood? Maya's story isn't unique, but her strategy was. And it's just the beginning. If you see yourself in her quiet strength, her refusal to perform pain for applause, her decision to build rather than burn, then this story was for you. Share it. Comment below. Tell us what you've faced and how you've moved forward, because Maya isn't done yet. In the next chapter, she steps deeper into the system, joining a federal task force buried within the Office of Civil Rights. She'll uncover suppressed case files, confront the language that protects misconduct, and face a new wave of resistance from inside the institution she's trying to reform. What happens when the architect is no longer building in silence, but in direct opposition to those who want the walls to stay untouched? Her next memo is already in draft. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned for the next episode of Maya's journey. The quiet revolution has only just begun.